You did not gain this weight because you stopped trying. You gained it because something changed in your body that no amount of trying could prevent on its own. If you are a woman over 50 and you have noticed fat accumulating around your midsection in a way that feels different from anything that happened to your body before, you are not imagining it. You are not failing. And the advice most people give you about eating less and moving more is not only insufficient. In some cases, it is actively making the problem worse. Today, I'm going to explain exactly what is happening in your body, why the standard advice backfires, and 5 specific things you can begin doing tonight that work with your biology rather than against it. And the accumulation of abdominal fat after menopause is one of the most consistently mismanaged health situations I see in clinical practice. Not because the solution is complicated, but because most of the advice being given is based on a model of fat loss that does not account for what menopause actually does to the body's hormonal and metabolic environment. Before we go further, one clinical note. Everything I am describing today addresses lifestyle and nutritional strategies for managing body composition during the menopausal transition. If you are experiencing significant symptoms of premenopause or menopause, including severe hot flashes, significant mood disturbance, or bone density concerns, those warrant direct clinical evaluation and a conversation about whether hormone therapy is appropriate for your specific situation. The strategies I'm describing today are complementary to clinical care, not a replacement for it. Now, what is actually happening? The fat accumulating around your midsection after menopause is not the same as the fat you may have gained and lost at other points in your life. Or it is not primarily a calorie problem. It is a hormonal redistribution problem, and understanding that distinction changes everything about how you address it. 4 specific biological mechanisms are driving it simultaneously. The first is the decline in estrogen. Research has found that women lose up to 40% of their estrogen during the menopausal transition. Estrogen does something most people do not know it does. It regulates where fat is stored in the body. When estrogen is high, the body preferentially stores fat in the hips, thighs, and buttocks. When estrogen falls, the regulatory signal changes. The body begins routing fat storage toward the abdomen and visceral region instead. This is not a choice your body is making carelessly. It is an ancient biological adaptation. Visceral fat is metabolically active in ways that subcutaneous fat is not. It can be mobilized quickly in times of energy demand. The body is redistributing its energy reserves to a location it can access more efficiently. The problem is that visceral fat, when chronically maintained at high levels, produces inflammatory compounds, disrupts insulin signaling, and increases cardiovascular and metabolic risk in ways that the fat in your hips and thighs did not. The second mechanism is declining insulin sensitivity. Even if you are eating exactly the same foods in exactly the same quantities you have always eaten, your body's ability to process carbohydrates has changed. Estrogen has a direct supportive effect on insulin receptor function. As estrogen falls, insulin sensitivity decreases. Carbohydrates that your body handled efficiently at 35 now produce a larger insulin response at 55 because more insulin is required to achieve the same glucose clearing effect. Insulin is the primary fat storage hormone. When insulin is chronically elevated, fat mobilization is suppressed. The body is in storage mode rather than burning mode. Visceral fat accumulates not because you are eating more, but because the hormonal environment in which the same food is being processed has fundamentally changed. The third mechanism is a relative increase in androgen dominance. Women produce androgens, including testosterone and DHEA, in smaller quantities than men, but in amounts that are biologically significant. When estrogen falls during menopause, the ratio of estrogen to androgen shifts. Androgens become relatively more dominant. This shift in androgenic signaling promotes abdominal fat storage, specifically contributes to changes in where muscle is maintained in the body, and can intensify cravings for calorie-dense foods. This is why many women notice their body shape changing from a distribution that emphasizes the hips and thighs to one that emphasizes the midsection, even when total body weight has not changed dramatically. The fourth mechanism is the slowing of resting metabolic rate. Research suggests that women burn approximately 200 fewer calories per day after menopause compared to premenopause, even when activity levels remain constant. The lean muscle mass that is the primary driver of resting calorie expenditure declines with age at a rate of 1 to 2% per year after 40. Less muscle means a slower metabolism, which means the same calorie intake that was maintenance before menopause becomes a surplus after it. Now, the mistakes that make all of this worse. I want to be direct about this because I see these patterns consistently, and they represent genuine harm being done by well-intentioned effort. The first mistake is aggressive calorie restriction. When you eat significantly below your calorie needs for an extended period, your body interprets this as a survival threat. Cortisol rises. The body prioritizes the preservation of fat stores, which represents survival energy over the preservation of muscle, which is metabolically expensive to maintain. You lose muscle. Metabolism slows further, cortisol remains elevated. And elevated cortisol directly promotes visceral fat accumulation through glucocorticoid receptors that are highly concentrated in abdominal adipose tissue. A study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology found that chronic dietary restriction increases cortisol and actually increases fat storage. You eat less, you store more. The mechanism is not mysterious. It is a predictable biological response to perceived starvation. The second mistake is relying primarily on cardiovascular exercise. Sustained moderate-intensity cardio at high volumes elevates cortisol, the same cortisol that chronic calorie restriction raises. A study in the journal Obesity found that excessive cardio training increased cortisol levels in ways that promoted abdominal fat accumulation. Long sessions of steady-state cardio are asking a stressed hormonal system to stress itself further, and the results reflect that. This does not mean cardiovascular exercise is harmful. It means that using it as the primary strategy for menopausal fat loss without the foundation of strength training is likely to produce frustration rather than results. The third mistake is ignoring hormonal drivers entirely. Insulin, cortisol, androgens are each independently contributing to the fat accumulation pattern being experienced. A strategy that addresses only calories and exercise without addressing these hormonal variables is working on the downstream consequences, while the upstream causes continue operating uninterrupted. Now, the 5 strategies that actually work. The first is time-restricted eating. A 2021 study published in Obesity found that women who fasted for 14 hours daily lost significantly more abdominal fat than those who ate across a longer window. The mechanism is direct. During a fasting period, insulin levels fall to their lowest point of the day. When insulin is low, fat mobilization is no longer suppressed. The body can access stored fat for energy. When eating windows are compressed, the total period of fat-burning availability each day increases. A practical protocol that works for most people is finishing dinner by 7 in the evening and not eating until 9 o'clock the following morning. This produces a 14-hour fasting window without requiring any change in what is eaten only when during the fasting window. Plain water, black coffee, and green tea are appropriate. Green tea specifically contains EGCG, a casein that has been shown to increase fat oxidation by approximately 17%. It is a meaningful addition to a fasting morning without breaking the fast. The critical distinction here is between time-restricted eating and chronic calorie restriction. They are not the same thing. Time-restricted eating compresses the eating window without necessarily reducing total calorie intake. Chronic calorie restriction reduces intake regardless of timing. The hormonal consequences of the two approaches are completely different. Time-restricted eating lowers insulin. Chronic restriction raises cortisol. One works with menopausal biology, the other works against it. The second strategy is reducing refined carbohydrates and significantly increasing protein. The declining insulin sensitivity of the menopausal transition means that refined carbohydrates, bread, pasta, rice, processed grains, produce a larger and more prolonged insulin response than they did in earlier decades. That elevated insulin response suppresses fat mobilization and promotes fat storage in the abdominal region. Reducing refined carbohydrate intake directly reduces this insulin burden. Protein does the opposite. High protein intake improves satiety through hormonal pathways, including peptide Y and GLP-1. It preserves lean muscle mass that would otherwise be lost to the age-related sarcopenia that is already operating. And unlike carbohydrates, it does not produce a significant insulin response. A Harvard study found that women who obtain 30% of their calories from protein maintain significantly more lean mass than those who did not. Lean mass is the primary driver of resting metabolic rate. Protecting it is protecting metabolism. Practical sources that are appropriate for this goal include eggs, chicken, fish, particularly fatty fish for their omega-3 content, full-fat plain Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, and legumes. The goal is to include a meaningful protein source at every meal and to ensure that protein rather than carbohydrate is the primary macronutrient anchor of the daily diet. The transition from carbohydrate-dominant eating to protein. Dominant eating does not require precision tracking initially. Begin tonight with a dinner that centers on protein and non-starchy vegetables and contains no refined grain. Observe your hunger, your energy, and your glucose pattern the following morning. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Margaret, 62 years old. She had been eating what she described as a healthy diet focused on whole grains, vegetables, and minimal fat for 4 years. While her abdominal circumference had increased consistently, she was eating carefully and getting worse. When I reviewed her dietary pattern in detail, two things were immediately apparent. Her protein intake was approximately 45 grams per day, roughly half of what her body weight and activity level required. And her carbohydrate intake, while not from processed sources, was high enough relative to her insulin sensitivity that her insulin levels were chronically elevated. We increased her protein to approximately 110 grams per day through the addition of eggs at breakfast, a palm-sized piece of fish or chicken at lunch and dinner, and Greek yogurt as an afternoon option. We reduced refined carbohydrate to 1 small portion per day, eaten at lunch rather than dinner. At 12 weeks, her waist circumference had decreased by 4 centimeters. Her fasting glucose had improved. She reported that the afternoon hunger that had been driving her toward crackers and bread had largely resolved. The dietary pattern changed. The hormonal environment changed with it. The fat followed. The third strategy is resistance training. Women lose 1 to 2% of lean muscle mass per year after 40. By the time menopause arrives, a significant portion of the metabolic machinery that was burning calories at rest has already been reduced. The only intervention that reverses this is resistance training that provides sufficient mechanical stimulus to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Cardiovascular exercise does not do this. Walking does not do this. Yoga does not do this. These forms of movement have genuine value for cortisol regulation, cardiovascular health, and mood. They do not provide the mechanical overload required to preserve and build lean muscle tissue. Resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. Focusing on compound movements that engage large muscle groups produces 2 simultaneous benefits that are directly relevant to menopausal fat loss. The first is the preservation of the lean mass that drives resting metabolic rate. More muscle means more calories burned at rest, including during sleep. The second is the post-exercise metabolic elevation. Resistance training produces what is called excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. The body continues burning calories at an elevated rate for hours after the session ends. This effect is substantially larger and longer lasting from resistance training than from steady-state cardio. A beginning protocol requires no gym membership. A pull-up bar installed in a door frame, a pair of adjustable dumbbells, and a set of resistance bands are sufficient for compound movements, including squats, deadlifts, rows, and overhead pressing. 2 sessions per week of 30 to 40 minutes each, focused on movements that challenge the large muscle groups to near fatigue, is enough to produce meaningful muscle preservation and metabolic benefit. The fourth strategy is managing cortisol. Cortisol does 2 things that are directly harmful in the context of menopausal fat loss. It promotes visceral fat accumulation through direct stimulation of glucocorticoid receptors in abdominal adipose tissue, and it impairs insulin sensitivity, compounding the insulin resistance that declining estrogen has already produced. Sleep is the most powerful cortisol management tool available. During deep sleep, growth hormone is released in pulses that support muscle repair and fat metabolism. Cortisol is cleared from circulation. Insulin sensitivity is restored for the following day. A single night of inadequate sleep reduces insulin sensitivity by up to 25% the following day. For someone already managing the insulin resistance of the menopausal transition, this represents a significant additional metabolic burden that no dietary or exercise strategy can fully compensate for. Practical steps that support sleep quality include ending eating at least 2.5 hours before sleep, reducing light exposure in the evening, and considering magnesium glycinate at 200 to 300 milligrams 1 hour before bed. Magnesium supports GABA-mediated nervous system relaxation and has been shown in multiple studies to improve sleep quality, particularly in people over 50 whose dietary magnesium intake tends to be insufficient. Ashwagandha, an adaptogenic botanical, has been shown in randomized controlled trials to reduce cortisol by approximately 28 to 30% over 8 weeks of consistent supplementation. For someone whose cortisol is chronically elevated by the combined stress of life demands and metabolic dysregulation, this represents a meaningful intervention. Daily walking, specifically 5,000 or more steps per day at a pace that elevates heart rate modestly, provides cortisol-lowering benefit through parasympathetic nervous system activation without the cortisol-raising consequence of prolonged high-intensity cardio. It is the most accessible form of active cortisol management available. The fifth strategy is addressing the specific nutrients that support the hormonal environment of this transition. Vitamin D with K2. Vitamin D insufficiency is present in the majority of adults over 50 and directly impairs insulin sensitivity through receptor-mediated mechanisms in pancreatic beta cells. Vitamin K2 supports the proper routing of calcium away from arterial walls and into bone. A particularly relevant concern as declining estrogen increases vascular calcification risk. Both are fat-soluble and should be taken with the largest fat-containing meal of the day. Creatine monohydrate has evidence specifically in postmenopausal women for supporting muscle protein synthesis and bone density when combined with resistance training. 3 to 5 grams per day is a safe and well-documented dose. Omega-3 fatty acids from fatty fish or a high-quality fish oil supplement reduce the systemic inflammation that drives insulin resistance and promotes visceral fat retention. 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week or 1 to 2 grams of combined EPA and DHA daily as a supplement addresses this mechanism directly. Here's where to begin tonight. Finish your dinner by 7. This begins your fasting window immediately without requiring any other change. Make that dinner protein-centered. Choose any protein you enjoy, fish, chicken, eggs, and pair it with non-starchy vegetables. Remove the bread, pasta, or rice from tonight's plate specifically. Before bed, take magnesium glycinate at 200 to 300 milligrams if you have it available, or add it to your next shopping list. Tomorrow morning, begin your eating window no earlier than 9. During the fasting window, drink water or plain green tea. This week, find a beginner resistance training routine of 30 minutes. 2 sessions this week. That is where the muscle preservation and metabolic restoration begin. The fat accumulating around your midsection is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of a hormonal transition that your body is managing without adequate support. The support is available. It is not found in eating less and moving more in the ways most people mean when they say those things. It is found in understanding the 4 mechanisms driving the problem and addressing each one specifically. Fasting windows to lower insulin. Protein and reduced refined carbohydrate to change the dietary hormone signal. Resistance training to preserve the metabolic machinery. Cortisol management to remove the compound factor that is working against everything else. Your biology has changed. Your approach needs to change with it. I am Dr. Kenji Sato. If this gave you a mechanistic understanding that the standard advice has not provided, share this with someone who has been doing everything right and wondering why it is not working. The answer is not that they are not trying hard enough. The answer is that they have been given the wrong framework for the problem they are actually facing. I will see you in the next